Let's go. You're about to hear Russell Brand go on an epic rant about the mainstream media. And as you know, Russell Brand always hits all sorts of points. He does it rapid speed. He's sitting with Joe Rogan as he did it. If you haven't sat and watched Joe Rogan and Russell Brand talk about the mainstream media in the newest podcast that Russell Brand was on, you need to see it. He's been on the podcast about 4 times. Check out the newest one. I learned so much about the world and the media from listening to those two. And I said it in the comment section to somebody, and I was like, if somebody came to you from the future, like 10, 15 years ago, and said, for truth and relevancy in the news, in the media, in the world, you were going to have to turn to Joe Rogan and Russell Brand, you would laugh at them. I mean, back then, Joe Rogan was just ranting about aliens being invisible, and Russell Brand was on heroin. Straight up. So this is just incredible. Let's get right into it. Let's switch over here. Oh, gosh, I don't have it up. Why don't I have it up? Bang, let's go. Let's get into this.
There is insignificant variety, in my view, between the two parties, which is why they're so willing to remain engaged in cultural war discourse and the conventional hot-button topics in this country in particular around the pro-life, pro-choice and guns arguments. They're willing to remain in that territory because financially and economically they are ultimately aligned, that the most powerful interests in America are happy with either outcome. I think that what's happened in the media space is they've unwittingly found themselves in a place where there's a kind of that incompetence was afforded, that they're not used to being challenged, that the assumption was that you would be sunk by that narrative, that it was an insignificant new space. And obviously it was a massive miscalculation because they weren't watching what was happening. They weren't listening to the conversations with McCulloch and Malone and Weinstein, and that it is apolitical. And that also that in order to make themselves seem distinct from one another, they have amplified their small differences to the point where they don't recognize actually that isn't America anymore. That people like that, even when I was a kid, if someone was just like right wing, that's just like, oh, that's a right wing person. Like you've been your family around your table. I read something about Tucker Carlson the other day, like, you know, because of the release of those January the 6th documents to Fox and to Tucker in particular. And it said far right journalist Tucker Carlson. If Tucker Carlson's not far right, he's like a normal right wing guy. Far right means marching and red, white, and black flags.
I've seen me written as far right.
Far right.
They've described me as far right.
Tattoos on the face, extreme boots. You know, like, far right's not just like, oh, I believe in Christianity and like, stuff like that. So the rhetoric has become hysterical. And the horse medicine was the same. They had the option of saying, look, we don't know, that there's no evidence as yet that ivermectin is effective in these spaces because no one's trialing it, because there's no money in it, because science is a subset of big pharma and the economic imperative's the right thing. No one's doing experiments into natural immunity because natural immunity is not profitable. No one's doing those experiments are not being underwritten. There's no clinical trials for that because no one wants that data for vitamin D or for steroids or for all of the things that came out as ultimately effective once the profits have been gleaned. And then how can you expect to maintain the authority? How can you expect to sit behind those logos of CNN and MSNBC and claim that kind of piety and certainty? And the way that they were like outraged by it was astonishing, like a kind of a how dare you have this credibility? How dare people listen to you? And I think that it's precisely because of a willingness to listen one day to a left-wing person, a right-wing person, some people with some crazy theories, some people talking about Egypt, some people talking about MMA. That's how people are now. People don't want that kind of centralised authority. It's over because of the way that technology has afforded people access to a variety of news sources, and a counter-narrative for any story can emerge almost at the same speed as the narrative. So now the price of authority is legitimacy. Authority has to be legit. And you can't, like, the same way as they did that horsewormer stuff with you. Like, if you watch Biden in Poland, he said, like, this speech is along the lines of, Putin thought that Ukraine would roll over. Putin didn't know how brave Ukrainian people are. He is a tyrant. And of course, Ukrainian people are brave. Of course, it's disgusting that there's suffering under this military invasion. But there's I could handle it, I think, if the president went, listen, we were involved in that coup in 2014. Even the sort of people that are the diplomats that are involved in this are the same diplomats that are involved in stuff like Iraq and Afghanistan. BlackRock are going to profit subsequently from the rebuild of Ukraine. Russia have got their agenda. We've got our agenda. We believe our agenda is more in line with what most American citizens will benefit. But they can't actually say that because it isn't true, because that what they want is a unipolar hegemonic world, in the same way that CNN don't even consider that what they're saying is dangerous and harmful. And now we're at a point where it's sort of that their approach to it may have been counterproductive in the most basic medical ways, and they weren't able to have that conversation because of financial imperatives and because they're basically owned.
Well, they're a propaganda network.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all they are. They're just a propaganda network. And I used to think they were the news, and I think at one point in time they were the news.
Wow. Jeez. Russell Brand just went at it. Man, that was nuts. And the one thing that stood out the most that he just said is that science is a subset of big pharma. That's very well said. That lays it out very, very. And not only that, mainstream media, in some sense, is a subset of big pharma as well, when you really think about it. Because when you think about, because the conversation they're having is about, how, CNN attacked Joe Rogan about using ivermectin. And when you think about it, you always think, like, how could they do that? How could they lie like that? How could they smear him like that? But it's almost like they have a kind of a gun to their head. Like, if you think about it, if you're a reporter and you're on CNN, you're Don Lemon, you're on CNN, you're never thinking that you're going to get fired like he did. You're thinking, as long as I stay with the narratives, I'll be fine. And my show will get bigger. I'll get more money. I'll get bigger contracts. I'll get more perks. I'll have a bigger team. I'll get more airtime. I'll get a better slot. You just think it's all just going to happen as long as you just stay with the program. So when something like this comes about and you know the truth, you don't really have an option to tell the truth. And that's not just CNN, that's Fox, that's ABC, that's MSNBC. You don't have an option to be like, guys, let's tell the real story right now. Everybody's going to look at you like crickets, So they can't even tell the real stories. So it seems like, because what Russell Brand said is that they're incompetent. It seems like they're incompetent, but they're not incompetent. They're probably all very good at their jobs. They were probably all very good journalists at some point, but they no longer have the option to be that type of journalist. They don't have the option to rant like Russell Brand. It's not a thing that they can do anymore. They're not allowed to say what they think. They're not allowed to cover the story the way the story needs to be covered. They're not allowed to do that. And Tucker Carlson's the greatest example of that. That's what happens when you decide to be one of those people and then also tell the truth. You get fired, and then after you're fired, you get silenced, you get gag ordered, you can't have a show, you can't say anything, you can't do anything outside of us. You have to go through legal battles. You're going to lose a lot of money. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. It's the greatest example of golden handcuffs. If you don't know what golden handcuffs are your job pays you so well that you're handcuffed to the job. Because if you go anywhere else, you won't get paid the same, which means you won't have the same lifestyle, which means you won't be able to provide for your family the same way. So you're handcuffed to this job. You're handcuffed, but at least the handcuffs are made of gold. It's very, really, really sad. Really sad when you think about it. And I'm so glad Tucker did it. And I wonder who's going to be the next to do it. Because he definitely won't be the last to step out and be like, I have to tell the truth. I have to talk about things the way they need to be talked about. Or maybe he will. Maybe most journalists keep themselves in a little bubble around their team and around the people who are in their network and make sure not to venture out of it in order to keep on amassing money. You know, money, man. People say it's the root of all evil. It's not, but not having it definitely is. It'll make you do some wild things. As long as you can keep your integrity, though, if you can remember what integrity means at all times in all facets of your life, you'll be fine. But if you forget because you're so hungry and you just don't have and you want so badly, it's so easy to forget and get tied up in everything. So that's all I wanted to show you guys today. Little rant from Russell Brand is always appreciated. Love this podcast. I've listened to it maybe 5-6 times. Way too many times, way too many hours, but it's a great podcast and you can learn so much about what's going on in the world by listening to this one. All right, guys, other than that, I am out.